Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and today I wanted to talk about day one patches. I know I've talked about this issue before, I'm sure, but today I wanted to talk about it specifically because I think it's taken itself a little step too far. Now, what triggered this, the catalyst for this, was multiple things. For example, Mass Effect recently released a patch where they fixed eyeballs or some goofy shit like that. Look, BioWare, pro tip, you're going to need a lot more patches. There's a lot more pressing concerns than eyeballs in that game, let me tell you. But recently I was playing through Persona 5, and I would love to show you gameplay for Persona 5, but I would sooner believe that Atlas would fucking carve out my testicles if I showed you that, where as far as how I am in the game at least. So I can't, I'm going to have to show you something else. I would love to show you Persona 5, but, things don't like to play themselves the way they do. Now, that game didn't really need a day one patch. In fact, as far as I know, I'm playing at version 1.0, and that to me is very shocking. And it hurts me to say that's a fucking shocking statement, because most games nowadays require some sort of a patch before you can really get into playing them. Now, of course, you don't need to ever download a patch, or you're not required to use a patch in certain circumstances, which we'll get to, though. But it's always nice to have them. But my issue is for those who unfortunately cannot get them, and it's kind of a big deal because to me it devalues the actual buying of video games. Now, for example, I'm going to relate this to the PlayStation and Xbox One specifically. As far as PC games go, I buy all of my PC games digitally. It's sort of the norm for a lot of PC gamers to get their games that way. Of course, not everyone does it. There's a lot of people in developing countries where they might have good computers, but they just don't have good access to internet. So they end up buying a physical disc so they don't have to download tons of gigs of data. They can just install that through the disc, and they can then download the patch if so be, because it's a lot more tolerable than simply downloading tons of data. For example, if you got to play a game like GTA 5 and, for example, you live in a place where internet is a hot commodity, then you don't want to be downloading the massive game that is. That also goes for like Forza Horizon or Gears or any of these big AAA games that have AAA file sizes. Now, as far as console games go, I choose to buy them mostly physical because console games tend to have the exact same price whether you're buying games physically or digitally. Now with PC games, they're usually $10 cheaper than buying them, on their console counterparts. And a lot of that we attribute to the fact that PC games have always been really priced like that. Of course, it's not always the case, but sometimes with PC games, you're typically buying them digital, so you're not really accounting for the $10 it would cost to buy a brick and mortar copy of the game, right? But with console games, you have to pay $60 regardless. So, for example, if I'm buying Persona 5, am I going to pay $60 for just digital data, or do I want to get the Steelbook edition case at my local game store? That would be a wiser choice for me. You get a little more tangible stuff out of your Dolans. You work hard, you want to have something more, tangible, right? But the thing is that with physical medium, it's sort of becoming more devalued with how these day one patches are going. For example, Final Fantasy 15 is a game that I desperately love. It's one of my favorite RPGs probably this generation. It's not a perfect game, but it's a damn good game. The problem is the game shipped with a 10 gig crown update. 10 fucking gigs. That is larger than games of last generation on the Xbox 360 that shipped on these DVD-9s. What the fuck were they thinking with this? Alongside Assassin's Creed fucking Unity, for example. For those of you who don't know, when you put that game into your Xbox One, God forbid you have a physical disc for the game, the astronomical file size for those patches is beyond comprehension. Why it's like that, I don't know. I feel like there are developers out there that are just re-chunking these fucking games out in patches. There are entire games, again, that are less than these patches. You could fit 2 or 3 games from the last generation into patches nowadays, and you would still have some motherfucking breathing room, let me tell you that. The other major issue I have with day one patches, aside from, fixing stuff, which that's what patches are supposed to do, is that oftentimes I find that they make the experience of video games worse than it actually is. And I've got 2, cases for that entirely. For example, Dark Souls 3 is a game that I ended up getting on PS4. I love that game to death. It's a very fun game. Since that time, I upgraded to a PlayStation 4 Pro. I got a 4K HDR TV recently, and I wanted to really have some hardware to, deliver some games on it. Games that are HDR supported 4K look very nice on it. Dark Souls 3 got a patch, a 60 frame per second patch. Now on the PS4 Pro, it's more like 30 to 50 frames per second. 60 maybe if you're looking at the fucking sky. But therein lies the problem. It creates a lot of judder, and the game is, it's not a smooth game anymore. It's a game filled with judder, and there's no way for me to turn it off rather than delete all my save data. Well, not delete the save data, delete the patch data. And if I do that, I can't play the game online, and I can't use my save file since they're now attributed to that new patch that came out. So there's a lot of caveats that come with this, and none of them are really pretty. It makes the game unplayable. I had to rebuy Dark Souls 3 alongside its DLC on the PC to play it at a smoother, consistent frame rate. It might seem like it's a massive deal and I'm making a big mountain out of a molehill, but it's a big deal when you're playing games that are running from 30 to 60. You might as well play them locked or not at all, in my opinion. You need that level of stability, especially for a game as, demanding as Dark Souls. Now, it's not just that, it's also Final Fantasy 15, for example. Final Fantasy 15, came out with PS4 Pro patches as well, too. The issue over here is that the game already had a PS4 Pro patch initially, and what it would do is that it would have either this checkerboard rendering, frame rate where you had a bit of judder, or you could have this 1080p locked 30. Now they put it to 60 and it has the same issue again. It just keeps juddering around. Basically, they ruined a good thing and you can't go back to it, and essentially the patches themselves are introducing newer problems. Skyrim on the PS3, for example, for those of you who remember that fucking train wreck. What happened with the PlayStation 3 version of that game is that as you played Skyrim, it would always save things. It would always save the state of every single thing. So the save files naturally got bigger. After a certain threshold of a file size in the PlayStation 3, really fucked up shit started to happen. And the only way to avoid that was to go through a new game. Now, Bethesda themselves created a patch to fix the issue. I think they patched the game 2 times. Both of them didn't do anything at all. They did fuck all. And essentially the game to this day still remains unplayable compared to its 360 counterpart, and more so to the PC side of things. So you come along these patches that ultimately are ruining the games, and they're taking away features that ultimately didn't need to be taken away at all. And now to this day, they're sort of becoming required. And I'm not talking about multiplayer games. If you're playing a game like Rainbow Six Siege, which is a multiplayer game, an online game, you can't really complain about patches. It's the nature of the beast. My issue here is with single player games. I like getting the disc copies on my PlayStation, but slowly but surely it's becoming a hassle because at this point, the disc copies that I am buying on the PlayStation 4, I don't have any benefit to them. I can't just switch my game back and forth without getting up to switch the disc. Not a big deal, but when the game ships on a disc, back in the day it had to be complete. On the PS2 era, you couldn't patch a game. There was simply no way. Even with the hard drive attached to the ass end of the PlayStation, there was no way to patch games on it. Xbox? Yeah, there were ways to patch on the original Xbox, but it was treated on a very case-by-case basis. Developers tried to make the game as great as it could on launch. GameCube, same thing, couldn't patch the game. When the 360 PS3 launched, initially, they didn't have massive patches either, even to the end of their lifespans. For example, Halo 3 on the PlayStation, Halo 3 on the Xbox 360, when it came out, even to this day, doesn't have patches over a few megabytes. Yes, you can get DLC that's a couple hundred megabytes, sure, but the actual patches required to play the game online aren't larger than a couple megabytes. Same thing with Gears or anything like that too. Nowadays, to play those same games such as Halo 5 Guardians on the Xbox One, you need to have like 100 gigs. So even having a baseline Xbox One that's like 500 gigs, 20% of that goes to Halo 5 itself, and that's because of the patches becoming larger than the actual core game itself. Sure, that's DLC as well, but you get what I'm trying to say. The patches nowadays, it's like games are going through this abusive relationship while they're being developed, and by the time they're rushed out, the developers have so many fucking band-aids on this shit that it ultimately results in a game that was probably fucking grossly unfinished to begin with. And it shows. Mass Effect Andromeda shows. Right now they're patching the game's eyeballs. Motherfucker, you need way more shit to patch than just eyeballs, alright? So you best get on that, BioWare. It's pretty important. It's pretty pivotal that you do. But then what aggravates me, though, is while Mass Effect is doing that, there are games like Persona 5, there are games like Nier Automata that are launching where day one patches, even if they are a thing, they're not required and the game still ships complete on launch. I think as somebody that buys video games and enjoys video games, I'm going to have to be a lot more careful now when I buy video games, simply because I'm not going to really support a developer when they're making single-player games that require patches up the ass before they're even somewhat comprehensible to play. But I think ultimately it's sort of headed there with a lot of these games shipping out grossly incomplete. And I think it's because they're so easy to do on the Xbox One, PS4 now, especially now that people are, in fact, buying their games digitally, which I don't agree with on the console front at least. These patches are going to get even fucking worse and worse and worse. Developers feel like they can create a game like No Man's Sky, release it on disc, basically in as playable as, a state as it could be, right? Without being referred to as complete early access and complete, and then decide to patch in the rest of the content later on. I don't really agree with that, but I'd like to ask the community what you think about it, because day one patches, I know I talked about them before, but man, are they getting fucking worse as time goes on. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.